The Rant Podcast is brought to you by CubsInsider.com. Welcome to The Rant. Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to 2025. I personally am very happy to be done with 2024 because it just wasn't a good year for me for a number of different reasons. And yeah, so I'm happy. Oh, by the way, I'm John Furlise. I'm joined by my co-host, Evan Altman. Happy New Year, Evan.
Happy New Year to you as well. It is, what is it, the 3rd? Is today the 3rd? Is that right?
The 3rd.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We're already 3 days in. And I don't know. We were talking, off air, and I assume others have kind of felt this same way, but with Christmas Eve was on a Tuesday, Christmas on a Wednesday, New Year's Eve on a Tuesday, New Year's Day on a Wednesday, and it's just this. It's like, man, give me my Friday holidays. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. I know they're not going to change it, but my God, it would be so much nicer if it was like Thanksgiving, a nice, dependable. It's
everything is just
whatever.
So broken up, right? Like you've got the weekend. And then like a day, and then it's Christmas Eve, and then like it's Christmas, and then like, a couple of days, and then the weekend again. And then like, it's just like you can't get any momentum. It was really like kind of awkward and clunky and hard to get into doing anything. And you like, even if you're like motivated during this time, it just doesn't last. It like falls off a cliff very quickly. So maybe that's what's going on with the Cubs. Maybe that's what we're seeing.
It certainly fell off a cliff quickly after they traded for Kyle Tucker. I guess as far as everybody's concerned, and I think what doesn't help or what hurts, I guess, would probably be, the perception at least, is because there've been a lot of dudes, like especially like heading up to the new year, kind of between that Christmas and New Year, there were a lot of deals that were getting signed, and the Cubs, added a couple of guys kind of low key, certainly not earth shaking moves, but you saw some dudes like Walker Buehler come off the table, right? And some other moves like that people thought, well, maybe the Cubs would be involved in. And as you're very well aware, being there in the Phoenix area, this is the funniest thing to me though. Like, there were Cubs fans that were disappointed that, mostly because there were a couple of unfounded rumors that were out there that the Cubs were going to be in on Corbin Burns. And I'm like, people, let's be honest with ourselves here. The Cubs were never going to be in on Burns. Who actually,
did you see that deal
in town? Yeah.
What was it? 6 years, $210 million, I believe. And a bunch of it deferred.
Yeah. A bunch of it deferred.
64 million.
So I think the net present value is actually like one. I'm fudging these a little bit. Maybe it's either 196 or 189. I don't know why those two numbers are kind of, one of them's not. I think it's 196, but either way, it's like $14 million that it got dropped because of how much is deferred to after, because it's a certain amount, each, and he's got an opt out after 2 years. Now that's the weird thing to me. So riddle me this: if he took less money to sign with the Diamondbacks because he lives there, he and his family, that's where they spend their, and now
he started with the D-backs, right? Didn't he come up in their system?
Did he? I don't know. I didn't think so. Maybe he did.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
I'd have to. I'll look at it now because but like if he wanted to be close to home and turn down more money in other offers to sign, then what's the value of the opt out? If the goal is to play at home, why even have that built in there? Right? Because wouldn't you want to stay?
He's still got a $35 million AAV though, right?
Yeah. It's there. Like, it's still, still the same, the full, that's
nice.
That's really solid, but he would have gotten more, right, from other teams, unless the thought is, and you're past this point now, and I'm way past it, but there's a point at which, like, when the kids, to me at least, when the kids were really little, it wasn't as big a deal if I was gone, because it's not as if they could really be doing much of their own thing, right? And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, God, we got to both, man, if somebody's gone, like, I got to take one kid here and one kid there. And then they kind of get a little bit older, and once they get to that point, not that they're necessarily self-sufficient, but like, hey, there's enough other friends, parents, teammates, whatever, that you can kind of make stuff work even if there's one. So part of me wonders, like, okay, are his kids at that age where he's like, I want to make sure I'm closer to home for the next 2 years. After that, if things change, okay, we can get back to it. They'll be in school, whatever, for a lot, not during the summer, of course, but I don't know. But that just struck me as odd because I'm like, why would you do this deal to be close to home and take less money, but then still have the opt out? Wouldn't you want to Bryce Harper the thing and say, no, I don't need an opt out. Just give me a little bit more and I'm good. But whatever. I don't
Hard
know.
to think he's going to be able to get a better than $35 million AAV after 2 years. I guess you never know, right? I mean, you never know where the market is. And by the way, he came up through the Brewers system, not the D-backs. I don't know what I was talking about, but yeah, so it is kind of funky. I mean, full no trade clause for the first 2 years. And then he's got the opt out after 2 years. And I think, was it after those, if he remains with the team in 2027, he could submit a list of 14 teams to which he cannot be traded without his consent. So it becomes a partial no trade clause after those first 2 years. And then I guess he doesn't have any more opt outs beyond there.
Yeah, which makes, and again, part of that could be the idea of betting on himself. It's kind of like we see it with college coaches all the time, right? They get a new gig, they come into a place, and then they get real successful. All of a sudden, you get the rumors of, oh, the NFL might be looking at this guy, and then he suddenly gets a contract extension. So I suppose that could work in his favor, or it could just be one of those mechanisms that they threw in there to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit.
But who saw the D-backs?
No, nobody
signing
did.
Burns. I guess that's really, it's like the D-backs are so random. And I mean, it works for them, here and there, but it's just like, there are years where it's just like, they're not spending any money. And then they went out and signed Montgomery last year and that fell flat.
Yeah, that was awful. Well, and how well did it work when they signed Mad Bum? Remember when they gave him a huge deal and nobody saw that coming?
What was he, like 43 or something?
Yeah, and that was a disaster. It was like, and that was where, even though, and again, I'm probably the least bullish on Burns of like anybody out there. Like all these people are like, oh man, I'd love him with the Cubs. I'm like, I wouldn't. Like, first of all, there was no way in hell they were going to make him the highest paid player in franchise history. That just wasn't going to happen. But, and I guess I've seen some stuff out there where his cutter did kind of start to come around a little bit more toward the end of last year, but like his numbers have steadily gone down for the last 4 or 5 seasons. His strikeout numbers are down, velocity's down, the cutter wasn't working as well. And that's a pitch that he leans on super heavily. I'm like, I don't know that I want to give this dude who, what is this? It'll be his age 30 season coming up. I'm not so sure I want to give this dude $200 million over the next 5-6 years. And so, like, I'm cool with the Cubs not doing this. It's super weird to me that the D-backs did it. But, and I hate that because I don't like to be that guy because I'm like, man, they need to go do this. But I'm like, if you just look at his strikeout numbers alone, it is alarming what has happened with the strikeout rate, the K per 9, that kind of stuff. Like, we're talking, so 2020, granted short season, so we could read into that, but strikeout rate 36.7, 21, 35.6. Then it went to 30.5, then 25.5, then 23.1. We're talking about over 13.5 percentage points falling off over the last 5 seasons. That is a huge red flag for me. Is he pitching well still? Sure. But I just, man, I look at that one. I'm like, thank God. I just don't think, and watch him now, win like 5 straight Cy Youngs and make me look like an idiot. But when we talk about the Cubs wanting to go out and spend money, I think a lot of times people are just like, they want the Cubs to spend money for the sake of spending money. That's what it would have felt like for me if they had turned the $25 million from Bellinger into Burns plus $10 million. Like that was just never going to happen. But still, I'm glad it didn't, personally.
And so, to your point, the Cubs have done, some little deals here and there. They signed Tucker. They traded for Bruhan.
Traded for Tucker.
Traded for Tucker. Sorry,
Andrew.
Bruhan was who did they do?
Mervis.
Matt Mervis for Bruhan. Yeah,
which is like, if that guy, I don't know. Maybe that dude breaks out, but that one just felt like both
His
teams were like,
offense
nah,
was
we got
just
no room
horrible.
for these guys anymore. Let's just. And I think
Both former top
it's a better
100
situation for both.
prospects.
Yeah, I think I'm happy for Mervis that he's going to be in a situation. I would think like the Cubs clearly just didn't believe in him. Like even when he was doing really well, because they absolutely did not allow. Well, they gave him a chance. He failed.
He
He
never
had
really had the
99.
chance.
No, he had 99 plate appearances that rookie season when the Cubs gave 100 plate appearances to Eric Hosmer and like 250 or 260 to Trey Mancini. Like they definitely did not give like if they had as bad as that team, were 83 wins as the Cubs were not good. They needed lefty power. And then they went out and traded for Michael Busch. Like they just did not have faith in Mervis, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But I do think that he's got a much better situation, really low pressure, a lot more room to roam with the Marlins. So hopefully he makes the most of it. I like the dude personally, and I'm biased in that regard. But shot him a text and just kind of happy holidays and best of luck on the next step. And he was really cool about it. I mean, it's like right after it got announced, so I don't know I don't know what that feels like for a player. But again, hopefully he gets the shot in Miami that he was not going to in Chicago.
Yeah, hopefully he gets on the big league team and actually gets a chance to prove himself there with some plate appearances. And so the Cubs really still they have work to do in the bullpen still. They don't have a closer. Well, I mean, maybe they do, but they don't have a good closer.
Yeah, well, I mean, who knows? Porter Hodge looked really good down the stretch.
Is he going to be their closer though?
I mean, as things currently stand, they haven't done anything to really, I mean, unless it's like one of those deals where they give that to Ben Brown, which I don't think is.
That would be weird.
Yeah, but I mean, Hodge looked good in the role, and I don't think it's very different from the way that Adbert Alzolay kind of took that over, right? In a sense, anyway, of not being an expected, because he came up and was supposed to be a starter and then kind of got pushed into that relief role and then kind of came in as a closer. So, I mean, I think right now, like it's one of those where they're. And I don't. Everybody else just say, "Well, that's how Jed Hoyer always does it." And I get it, but it feels kind of like they're saying, "Hey, we're okay with this if we have to be." Whether that's legitimate or if it's a means by which to convince themselves, like not to go out and spend a ton of money somewhere unnecessarily, I do feel like that's kind of their deal. Is they'll get someone to say, "Hey, we got a person here who we can reasonably survive with in this role." And therefore, we will not overspend to fill it. I don't believe that's something they should continue to do from a bullpen construction in general strategy, but I think that's how they look at it. I mean, they got Merriweather in there as well, so they've got some guys who have that kind of. I'm surprised they haven't. Maybe they have. Maybe Kyle Finnegan's just holding out, but I mean, I feel like Kyle Finnegan's a guy who's got experience closing significant. Kirby Yates had a great season last year. I think 33 saves, something like that, with like a 117, 177 ERA for the Rangers. Like that's another guy who I think if you're going to overspend, and I'm doing air quotes, right, on a reliever, especially relative to what the Cubs generally do, I'd do it on a 1-year deal, right? Because, okay, if flops, who cares? Like you're nothing. But having a veteran closer or at least a guy with a lot of closing experience who can just be a late inning high leverage. If you think Porter Hodge is the dude, but then at least you've got between Merriweather and let's say a Yates or a Finnegan, who if the young guy struggles, or you make that dude the closer and then Hodge is the next to. Hey, if you happen to win a few games in a row, Hodge is the guy who comes in to get the save on
that. I like that. I see Hodge as a high leverage kind of guy, like coming in. We the Cubs need that guy still. They tried that with Alzolay. They tried to make him the closer, like you said, but it just feels like the seventh, eighth inning guy to come in and kind of shut the team down is the type of pitcher the Cubs need. Still.
Yeah. Well, and that's And the thing is, if you sign a guy, if it's a 1-year deal, right? Like Yates is 37 or whatever, he's only getting 1 year, more than likely. I mean, unless somebody goes crazy. Finnegan is in his last year of arbitration eligibility. That's only 1 year, right? And so you can really easily pitch it to Hodge as like, hey, you're still going to get opportunities to close games. You're still going to work late innings, and if you continue to prove yourself, you'll get another shot at the role next year as well, in addition to working those late innings now. So it doesn't really throw things. You don't have to hand the reins to a rookie / second year guy, and you've got insurance against if we bring one of these dudes in and they're not everything we need, Craig Kimbrell, then we can kind of slot somebody else in there. So I just and that gives them a much more significant back end. I think what you really want, and what they've kind of done right, they've gotten some of these little deals here and there. They picked up a couple guys. I know Caleb Thielbar was the latest, and that's more of your kind of middle inning lefty. But I do think they've at least set it up to where like Craig Counsell's not going to have to spend the first 2-3 months of the season figuring out who goes where, right? You need to give him here's the bullpen, right? Like, here's what you've got. Don't buy him some old ass car that you got to figure out. Like, oh man, the blinker doesn't work, so I got to keep flipping the handle if I'm turning left, and then the windshield wipers only work if I do this thing, and then I got to jiggle the handle this way to get the door to open. Like, don't make him figure all these things out about some busted ass car, right? Buy him a new car where the buttons work and the switches do what they're supposed to, so he can be confident in that. Like, I'll give the example of when I don't rent as much anymore when I travel cars. That is, I'll just do Uber or Lyft or whatever, because it's just a hell of a lot easier, right? Usually quicker, especially if you're in Dallas. You don't have to go 15 minutes out to the stupid the rental car shuttle and figure it out. But what I would try to do is say, hey, whatever car is available, like whatever I'm driving, if it's a similar make or model, great. Like, I've got a Ford Edge. It's awesome if I can go someplace and get a Ford Edge, Escape, Explorer, whatever, because the buttons are all the same. I know where
you're good. You know where things are,
right?
You know how to roll the windows up and lock the doors.
If I show up at night in a city that I'm not unfamiliar with, maybe it's raining, whatever, I'm good. I know how to work this thing. I'm not going to be, tensed up. Similarly, it's a slightly different team from last year, but if you can at least give Counsell a bullpen that he's comfortable with, that he's familiar with, that he doesn't have to, like I said, doesn't have to spend time figuring out. Performance is another issue, but I think knowing where guys slot in, having an idea of here's who pitches when, I think will help tremendously, especially with as bad as the bullpen was in the early going last year. And we can slice that up all kinds of different ways, but that may have cost them upwards of 10 wins. Do they win all those games that they blew? If they, again, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, if they had not blown those 26 saves or whatever, they'll win 20. Well, no, that's not really the way it works. You might still lose some of those, even if you didn't blow the save in that same fashion. But
how much?
I think,
How much say do you think Craig Counsell has on the roster construction going forward?
I mean, I think that's part of the reason they brought him in was because he had spent so much time with the front office in Milwaukee and kind of understood. I don't think he's got, certainly veto power over anything, but I think he's got input. I think it's something I would be shocked if they brought a guy in and, fired their old manager and then made this dude the highest paid manager in baseball to not have a voice in it. And so I think
like you feel like he had to have something to do with the Kyle Tucker signing just because it had been so long since the Cubs had gotten a guy, traded for a guy or signed a guy that was at that caliber. And so I'm guessing he had some input there and maybe pushed that one to the finish line, but we don't know. And it'll be interesting to see just in terms of, as we talk about the construction of the bullpen, Roki Sasaki, the international signing period opens on January 15th. And so he's not expected to sign before then, obviously, but
he can't sign before then.
Yeah. And so will the Cubs are mentioned, the Dodgers are mentioned, and they seem in every time they're mentioned. The Cubs are also being mentioned as a possible landing spot for him. That'd be a huge win for the Cubs if they could acquire him. It wouldn't clear up the bullpen necessarily, or maybe it would, right? It bumps some guys, or at least one guy down off the starting from a starting pitcher into the bullpen, and so maybe it does clear things up. But
although I would argue, yeah, if they sign Sasaki, I think they go if they. I don't want to say luck into that because it wouldn't be a luck thing. It would be that they pitched him, no pun intended, really, really well on Chicago. And I do think that having the success that we saw from Shota Imanaga, being able to step right in, because the biggest thing in the past that we've seen with Japanese players is kind of that transition period, right? Yeah. Kind of hitting the ground running in MLB and often needing quite a bit of time to acclimate. Shota Imanaga came out just absolutely shoving, right? I mean, he was just excellent from day one. And so I think that's a big help because we are talking about somebody who, he's young. But I think with him, similar to what we've seen with some of the other guys, we could look at Matthew Boyd, who the Cubs definitely cannot count on. Maybe he'll be healthy and pitch, 150 plus innings. But I think even counting on him for 100 is a little bit light. I think they need to go with a 6-man rotation. And maybe even if they just get somebody else other than Sasaki, I think that's smart because if you look up and down there, I mean, you've got, again, Imanaga, who is still used to that, and they still had to take some time, although what was the one time they gave him like 10 days off, and that was stupid. But, Justin Steele has had some issues with remaining healthy for an entire season. And Boyd certainly has. You've got Imanaga, who's used to that. If they got Sasaki, he's used to the 6-man. And so that would be a way to spread that out a little bit, give you the ability to use someone, whether that's Javier Assad remaining in a starting role or whether we're looking at Jordan Wicks. You have somebody who can either slot in as sort of that once, maybe it's a modified, right, where it's not always just 6, but you're going 5, and every once in a while this guy stretches out, and maybe he's a long reliever in there. But they toyed with that last year, thought about that idea when they had picked up Imanaga, and I think it's something they opted not to do at the time. Well, it is something they opted not to do at the time, but it just, as we're going to see the game continue to evolve with starting pitchers throwing fewer and fewer total innings, to me, it only makes sense. And go with your strengths, right? If you can do that and spread it out. So that's what I think they should do. And if they manage to get Sasaki, I don't want to say I'd be shocked if they didn't do it, but I think that would push them heavily toward that. Because again, this is a dude who I don't think he's ever thrown, like maybe once he's thrown over 120 innings, and made more than 20 starts. So spreading him out and allowing him to kind of come along. He's like 23 years old too, right? Like super young guy. He's had some injury issues. He throws super duper hard. Allowing him to acclimate. So I think it's as much about him as it is about the team, but that combination of things, and I'd say the same thing about the Dodgers. I think if they had him, they'll probably go that route too, which would be wild to have like 3 elite Japanese pitchers in an MLB rotation. I mean, regardless of what team it is, but yeah, that'll be very, very interesting to see how it all kind of comes together. But the fact that the Cubs are still, in the mix is cool. And that's certainly a move that would cost them virtually nothing, which is just, again, that's right up Jed Hoyer's alley. The value return on that would be tremendous.
Well, that's what he did with Imanaga, right?
Yeah. I mean, but even less so, like think about that. Cause Imanaga got like half, 50-ish million, half of what kind of people expected. But now you're talking about a dude who's going to get like at most a $10 million signing bonus. I guess it could really go to 12 if some team maxed out their whole pool, which I don't think is, I wrote about this recently, I don't think is necessary. If he's already given up, like what could he have gotten in 2 years? I mean, you look at what Yamamoto got, 300 million, 325 from the Dodgers. This dude is limited to a minor league contract that's going to pay him $795,000 a year. And then, whatever amount of the team's international bonus pool they want to spend. But my contention the whole time, like all these people are like, oh, these teams are going to scramble to get the most. I'm like, dude's going to give up at least $200 million to sign now instead of in 2 years. Do we really think that a team giving him $8 million versus 9 or 10 versus 12 is what's going to determine his. No, of course not. I don't. And as I posited the other day, my thought is he's banking on his future. He wants to be great. This is what his
Yeah,
agent has said, right?
there's no doubt.
So why, if I'm a dude coming in and I want to join this team with the hopes of it being really good over the next 4, 5, 6 years and having, more money to spend on other players and everything else, does it make any sense for him to demand that a team spend their entire bonus pool on him and forego signing any other legitimate international free agents in that class? That would be totally bass-ackwards to me. So I think the dude will actually sign for much less than people think in order to allow his team to still facilitate other signings. That's my thought. Now, watch somebody go give him 12, and that's what he takes, and they tell all these other kids from the Dominican and Venezuela and everywhere else, sorry, I know we've had an agreement with you for the last 2 years, but we signed this other guy, go pound sand. That just doesn't seem like a good deal to me.
Yeah, that's probably not the best move. Yeah, I agree with you. I could see them, I mean, really, what's a couple $1,000,000 when he's giving up so much just to come? But to your point, I mean, it's kind of like what Ohtani did, right? I mean, Ohtani came in and wasn't making a ton of money right away, but now look at where he's at, right? And so you leverage the future by your performance over the first couple of years, and then you hope to get that big deal. That $700 million plus deal going forward. The when you look at the Cubs pitching staff and their bullpen right now, to me Ben Brown came out and he was good, but to me he still has something to prove. I think you could say the same thing about Luke Little. And Daniel Palencia, I mean there's some guys here that, I mean, Keegan Thompson, and not as much, but I mean, he's been kind of up and down too. Cubs got Rob Zastresny back. Rob, he's the only Cubs player that I have on video saying, I love Cubs Insider. So,
Yes.
There's that. But the Cubs bullpen, I mean, there's a lot of upside there. I think that I don't think we've realized yet. And so that's where it's like, if you're Jed, are you looking at it saying, Julian Merriweather, he pitched fairly well last year before, like, I think he ended up getting injured, but did he get injured down the stretch?
He did. Yeah. He spent a lot of the season on the IL.
And so, there's some guys in there that, Ben Brown got injured, Luke Little got injured, that could come back. They've learned in that year, last year in 2024, they probably have some lessons to carry with them into spring training. They're probably going to approach spring training a little differently, and you could see some upside there.
Yeah, I mean, think about like what happens. Yeah, if and Brown is healthy, and what if Cade Horton? Again, I still am. I don't want to say skeptical, but I'm. My optimism is very guarded, just with the whole subscapular strain and kind of how the Cubs and other teams, not just the Cubs, will classify certain injuries when that's not really what it is.
Yeah.
And anything kind of rotator cuff related is always a scary thought. So you just hope that like that's legit, because if that dude, again, you talk about their top pitching prospect, if he's able to come back, and I assume they'll treat him with kid gloves and he's going to be brought along slowly, and any MLB debut is going to involve him in the bullpen. But man, if you allow that dude to basically go full send in shorter bullpen outings, then the velo plays up, the slider's nasty, like that could really be a huge boost to them down the stretch. Again, provided he is healthy and can remain that way. There are some guys that you can look at. And again, we mentioned Hodge, as kind of that homegrown, like all of a sudden you're looking at, and Brown's not really homegrown, but some dudes that are coming up through the system. Zastrisny, technically homegrown now that he's back, of course, but I mean, he was the first player, the first pitcher drafted by Theo Epstein with the Cubs to come up and make his debut when that happened many years ago at this point, right? And he's got himself a World Series ring, and an all-around great dude. So glad to see him back. I don't know that he'll be able to stick or do much, but I think there's a good mix here of, some of the dudes they went out and got. And there's some flyers. This is Ben Heller, who they got on a minor league deal, who I don't think we should expect much out of. But if we flip that around to kind of, almost following on the Craig Counsell question earlier about input into the stuff. So Tyler Zombro, who they hired earlier in the offseason away from Tread Athletics, who's been getting a bunch of dudes poached. Tread Athletics and Driveline both are getting tons of dudes poached by major league clubs, which is good and bad, right? Speaks well for what they're doing. Sucks to lose good people, but you understand why. But Zombro came from there. Heller was a Tread guy, or is a Tread guy, I should say, with a nasty split change that he developed there. A lot of trouble staying healthy. The consistency has been spotty, but you just wonder, is that one of those deals where, Zombro was in Hoyer's ear and Carter Hawkins' ear and hey, it's a minor league deal, right? So there's no risk to it. But I like what Zombro is bringing, because I think we've seen for so long now, right? Despite the changes that they made philosophically in terms of how they would evaluate and draft and develop pitchers. And the Cubs aren't alone in this. The Rangers have done a crappy job of it. But they just haven't done a good job of developing pitchers, of seeing increased velocity through their time in the minors and getting these guys up to the major league system, the major league team, to have an impact, right? We talked about Hodge, like he's kind of one of them, but that's, the jury is still out a little bit, not as much experience. Alzolay kind of looked like that guy, but he could never stay healthy. Steele is a good success story, but we're not seeing a consistent pipeline of guys who come up and stay up, right? Ethan Roberts has had some more success. So anyway, I put that, it was a long way around of saying I think Zombro is a guy who can really help with that when it comes to player evaluation, right? You've got Dan Kantrovitz, who's looking at the kind of the amateur side. Who are we drafting and how are we evaluating that? But when it comes to like player acquisitions, who are we going to trade for? Who are we going to sign as free agents? Who are we going to bring in on these little these flyers? And some of it comes down to there's a measure of it that you can look at the eye test. There's a measure where you can look at the data. But I saw a really cool video that Zombro did for Tread, and because we get obsessed with numbers, right? And we're trying to look at these things, and if we don't contextualize them properly, you can go to Baseball Savant. You can look at the big numbers on who's got the highest spin rate, who's got the most, H break and V break, so horizontal and vertical, right? And then let's look at these big numbers, and big numbers are better, bigger or better. But that may not really be the case depending on a guy's certain, his arm slot, his velocity, his approach angle, things like that. And so understanding how to better contextualize that, and then how to bring out the most in the players that they target and that they bring in, that they have in the system, I think will be huge. And if they can kind of find a couple little unlocks to help somebody's consistency or performance, that's when I start to get really excited, even about some of these unknown moves, because there's always Jed Hoyer, right? What was his big thing? We need to find players who are going to outperform expectations. And it's much easier to outperform a low expectation, right, than it is to be Kyle Tucker and be like, you got to put up 8 WAR or you suck.
I just hate that. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. You're never going to hear the Dodgers say, we need to find players that are going to outperform expectations. You're never going to hear any other big league, big margin, big market team say that. And so every time I hear that, it gets under my skin, because it's not the Cubs are a big market team. I mean, they make a ton of money, right? It's not like they're not poor.
And I will say though, and I think we might have talked about this, so I don't want to, go to the horse factory on this thing, or the glue factory, but there's a difference. It depends on how you say it too, right? Like, hey, we need players to outperform expectations. And then part of that is, well, you need to because you're cheap, and totally understand, like, that's a bad thing. But on the other hand, I look at it and say, well, if everybody just performed to expectations, then you don't get a season like what Aaron Judge just had, or Shohei Ohtani just had, or Bobby Witt Jr. just had. Those guys all exceeded expectations, right? Like, you need that. However, the issue
they're all high ceiling guys, though,
right? And they're they're high ceiling and incredibly high floor. When your floor is 6 WAR and you manage to outperform that, well, now you're huge. The problem is when you have a bunch of dudes who are all 3 and 4 WAR players, then unless they massively outperform, which is what the Cubs have, right? They're 3 and 4 WAR guys mostly. But I also look at it and say the bullpen in general is not a unit on the roster that is expected to do much, right? You got a closer or whatever. I mean, individually, like as far as individual contributions, WAR, when we think things like that. But I think there are a lot of areas there that they can bring those guys out of. And I do think there's potential. Again, Matt Shaw is a guy who, and if you look at like the ZiPS projections for the Cubs are actually pretty high, which is really nice. And so now that is the expectation. The expectation for the Cubs position players is that they'll perform significantly better than what they did last year. Which I've done some numbers on that and put it out there and shown how that's entirely possible. But I really think Shaw is a guy who might even be undersold at 2.5 to 3 WAR. Like we all want to believe that. We all want to, see rookies bust out, but like I truly believe this guy is the dude. I mean, I really think he's going to come in. We're not talking Chris Bryant. That was still freakish. And if you look back at KB's numbers, it's still amazing to see how good he was over those first 3 seasons in particular. But Shaw, I truly, truly believe, look at how bad the Cubs third basemen as a group have been over the last 3 to 4 years. And then consider that you can bring in a dude as a rookie who could come in and outperform all of them, 20 plus homers, 20 plus steals, and good enough defense to not be Chris Morel there. Then yeah, man, I'm sold. Like that's a huge improvement just on its own instead of having what had been defensively and for the most part offensively a black hole.
Yep. Well, I mean, obviously we're going to see how it plays out. And one other name that we should not forget, but that is easy to forget, is Caleb Killian. I mean, here's a guy who you kind of feel like this is make it or break it for him. And like, I'm almost a little surprised he's still on the 40-man. Like they haven't done something with him. And I mean, there's got to be a reason, right? You got to think. And so, but it feels like here's a guy who has done really well in the minors and has just not been able to translate that into the big league, to the big league team. And so is there upside with him though? That's what I can't figure out with Killian. Is like, is this a guy who, before he came up and really shat the bed, it felt like there was a lot of upside with him. And then when he finally got up to the big leagues, he could not get a batter out.
Yeah, he just couldn't throw strikes, right? He was just zooing the ball all over the place. Yep. I mean, really, like it was painful at times. And part of that, I think there's been, I know there were some issues with, he had, I think it was his left knee that was giving him trouble, and that was really cost. So it's like, is this one of those guys who, and he had put up, before the Cubs got him, had put up some phenomenal numbers in the minors. Then the Cubs get him, send him to the Arizona Fall League. Again, just absolutely carving dudes up out there. And then he gets to the majors, and at least, all of a sudden he can't find it. Is this a Nuke Lelouch kind of a thing? Is it psychological? Are there some physical? We know there have been some physical things, but is it the pressure, or can he settle in and be that guy? Because I mean, he looked very much at his best like a mid-rotation type of really solid starter who could go out there and get out big breaking ball and all that. But does he just fall into kind of that middle relief role, or is he that dude who like you forget about, the Cubs end up parting ways with him? He bounces out, and 3 years from now, he's like
wins a Cy Young.
Yeah, or he's like the Clay Holmes or somebody like that, right? Who reinvents himself and is now this lights out reliever.
Yes,
because the velocity. I think part of the problem too, though, and I don't want to make this an issue. Like a lot of people try to like vilify the idea of chasing velocity and all that, but I do wonder how much. I don't really wonder it. I know that this is an issue, so maybe let's just couch it as that. But the Cubs really put a lot of work into having him develop his velocity. We saw him get up into the upper 90s, at which point all of his stuff is playing up. Well, as a pitcher, if you are talked about Corbin Burns, it's not easy to go from a power guy to a finesse guy. And not that he's all the way to finesse yet, but he's trended that way pretty hard. And that really is difficult for some dudes. It's just as difficult a lot of times to go from finesse to power because you understood how all your stuff worked when you were at a certain level, and asking them to ramp that up, everything starts playing up. The ball is moving differently. Now I don't know, where do I need to start this pitch? Because we saw that with Killian. A lot of stuff was just carrying so far out of the zone that it was completely uncompetitive. And so is it a situation where he needs to dial down, or does he just need to get used to that higher level and throwing with different pitch shapes and that sort of a thing? So I think that's the thing, is they see enough in him. I almost wonder if they're more afraid of the same scenario that I put out there, that he goes somewhere else and is really successful with the team that understands how to make him work. Can they get him in front of Zombro? Can they get him in front of some of these guys who are maybe seeing some different stuff, tweak the repertoire a little bit, and he comes out and is able to shove? So that's what I hope. But man, it is weird because that's
a real wild card.
Yeah, like you said, it's just a dude we've all completely just pretty much written off and said, well, if they get, but they're again outperforming expectations, right?
And he's only 27.
Yeah, he's got time,
right? I mean, oh yeah. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. On another note, CubsCon, baby, in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting. Kyle Tucker's going to be there, and Sammy Sosa. Don't know what they're doing with Sammy right now. Like, he's going to be there. I haven't seen the panels. I don't know if you've seen kind of what the plan is for rolling Sammy out. I assume he'll be there on the opening night, which will be the 17th, Friday, the 17th of January. You'll be there.
Yeah.
I won't be there. I'll be in Las Vegas with my son for a baseball tournament, which will probably be fun too. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be, just thinking back to the past few years, Cubs cons, like there's probably more excitement coming into this one than there has been since 2017, maybe. I mean, when was the last time we actually had something to be excited about? Because I guess last year, Imanaga. Had the Cubs signed Imanaga?
And Council, they announced Imanaga on the first, like that opening. It was on Friday earlier in the day, and they brought him in. And I didn't go last year because there was like this terrible storm. So it didn't end up kind of manifesting as bad as what it was supposed to be. But a lot of the worst of it was like kind of in Northwest Indiana, through which I would have to traverse. And I'm just like, based on what they've done, like if it was a different, like the 2015, you bringing out Madden and all these guys coming through, 2016, 2017, following the World Series, like there were a few of those where it was just like such a strong energy around the place. And like the vibe was awesome. And the last few have been fine, but it's just, and they changed things up with the format a little bit with where the minor league teams are and some of the vendors and things. They shifted a little, and it just kind of so again, this is 25, so it would have been 23 was the last one I went to. It was fine, but my gripe still remains, like it used to be really cool on Sunday mornings. They would do that down on the farm panel. There wouldn't be a ton of people there, but it was great because they had the farm director, some of the scouting director guys. And, for those who were into the minors and into prospects, it was a tremendous panel. And a lot of that was because there just weren't as many guys around, or as many fans around, right? Because they're kind of closing up as the last one of the event. And to me, it was a nice little capper. I'd finish that off Sunday morning and then drive home. And then when I was there the last time, I was like, I'm not sticking around for Sunday. There's nothing going on Sunday morning. Like I left Saturday night, drove home, which actually worked out much better, But yeah, I think there's the Sosa thing alone, and I know there's a lot of conspiracy theorists like, oh, they're only doing this now to cover up what they haven't done. From like, folks, I don't know. Like it only.
Have you been paying attention in the last 5 years?
That's like a one-trick pony. You know what I mean? You don't pull some dude out for CubsCon and be like, pay no attention to other things we're not doing or whatever. Like, what that works for a weekend. Do you really think they're that concerned with how fans are going to feel at Cubs convention that they're doing this to cover up from other, like, if that was the case, and like you said, yeah, they would have had to have done this years ago for that to have worked, because people were way more I mean, like, you remember when the Ricketts first canceled their family panel? Like, people were pissed then. You're acting like they're pissed. Folks, this has been going on for years. For the last several, like 4 or 5 years. Come on now. This isn't something new that they're like trying to mask, you know, or like whatever. Like, no, people, come on. That's not, it's just one of those things where I think it eventually finally got to the point where, like, okay, we can't just keep this guy out anymore. We can't continue to keep him out of the Cubs Hall of Fame. I'm still shocked at the number of fans. But here's the other thing. There's a not insignificant number of fans who are upset about this, who still just hate Sosa. He's a cheater. Oh, I'll never support him. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know, man. What? It's been 20 years, folks. Let's let it go.
Well, so let's backtrack. Apparently I read this, and I was familiar with the fact that Club 400, Stuart McVicker, got Sammy Sosa to come to Club 400.
Yep.
If you don't know what Club 400 is they bring players in, and then they raise money for disadvantaged people, Cubs fans. They try to help them out. And they do some really good work. And Stewart started this back in 2013. And so Sammy Sosa came, I think, over the summer. I'm not sure exactly when
I think
he came.
it was. Yeah.
And apparently that kind of started the ball rolling. I think they got him there and had enough people talking to him, trying to convince him that, hey, maybe there's a way back. Do you want to come back? And having those types of conversations. I wasn't privy to the conversations, but I imagine that that's kind of how it played out. And then next thing you know, he's issuing an apology to the Cubs. And so kudos to Club 400 and Stu for being a part of that. And then we've got Sammy. Sammy's coming back. And so really cool kind of story. Hopefully we get, kind of more detailed information on the whole story and how that played out at some point in the future. But it's just cool that he's going to be back. And I'm excited to see like how exactly he is presented at CubsCon. And I'm sure you'll be shooting video, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, I'll try to. I mean, it kind of depends. I get that opening ceremony, man. I've done a couple times where I've gone in there and been kind of in the midst of the stuff, and it just drives me crazy. So a lot of times I'll just hang out in the back, like we'll see, but I should be able to get it. And either way, like there's big screens that are up there and we can get it and kind of get the sound of it. But there's a lot of us who are there, in the blogging, podcasting community, right, who will gather there. And I know when I was there a couple years ago, I was kind of hanging out toward the back, and I ran into Brett Taylor from Bleacher Nation. He's like, "Oh, thank God, somebody else I know." Because we're all. It's just it's a different. Not that we're better or anything than anyone else, but we're sort of there as fans, yes, and to cover the event and to kind of as an extension of what we're doing with our sites and with this podcast and whatever. But there are. A vast majority of the people who are there are clearly just straight up super fans who for them it's like a trip to Disney World. For all intents and purposes, I do not view it that way. And that's not even as me as a blogger guy. That's just kind of my personality, is that larger gatherings like that and everybody's all together. Sporting events one thing, but this is kind of a different animal for me. So like I'm not there to get autographs, do that whole thing. I'm trying to catch up with people. So anyway, the opening ceremony is more about like, all right, let's see how quick they can get through all these people. Let's see, is there a big pop for some of these guys? All right, cool. They announced everybody. Let me get the hell out of here before everybody else starts coming out of the ballroom, get over to Lizzie McNeil's and grab a drink. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm interested to see the pop. Do they announce him early? Do they kind of throw them in there just to go in alphabetical order? Because usually it's like the legend players first and then the current players. So I assume as long as they get him there, But will he be a prima donna about it? I don't know. I'm quite interested there, and to see what the reaction. I'm sure there'll probably be some people in attendance who aren't happy about him being there. Does he get booze? I don't know.
Oh, I'd be surprised.
I wouldn't,
I'd be
dude.
really surprised.
They booed the crap out of some people in the past.
But Sammy,
yeah.
I mean, come on.
I've been on Facebook enough to know that not every fan out there is necessarily rooted in like pragmatism and just kind of the normal
but
society.
The people on Facebook, the Facebook kind of villains, so to speak, are just that because they can hide behind a screen. Typically, they don't bring their villain-like ways out into the public, so to speak. So we'll see. What happens. But it does feel like the Cubs get a free pass a little bit, and I don't know if it's a free pass for CubsCon because you're always like hoping that something big breaks right before CubsCon. But with Sammy coming back and the Kyle Tucker signing, I mean, you could look at it one of two ways. You could say, all right, the Cubs have a free pass. They don't really need to do more because they've already got enough kind of, to build off of for CubsCon, a little momentum, things like that. Or they could come out and one more pop, one more signing, a little Sasaki here, and really blow the place up, right? I mean, like, could you imagine coming into CubsCon with Kyle Tucker, Sammy Sosa, and then announcing Sasaki?
Yeah. That would be huge. That would be.
We'd all be excited. We'd be hugging, crying.
But I mean,
it would be fun.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, to go, hey, 2 years in a row, hey, we just signed another Japanese superstar pitcher, and that would most definitely kind of quell the sort of the rabble that's going on right now about how they haven't done anything since Tucker. Like that was it. Just like when they got counsel and then they didn't do anything.
Yeah,
and it's like, I mean, those are apples and elephants, but it is. I mean, they do need to do things. So of course, Sasaki or no, whatever they're doing with him does not preclude them from going in and adding another reliever, or from getting, and maybe it's Hye-Seong Kim, who's the KBO player who the Cubs are reportedly have made an offer on. His posting deadline closes. We're recording this on Friday the 3rd. Posting window closes at 5 p.m. Eastern today. So, I mean, that could be another dude that they add who's kind of in that Josh Rojas mold, lefty batting, versatile infielder, coming over from Korea. The reports are that the deal the offers are only for around $10 million. So, the projections have been like 3 years, somewhere in the $20 million range. So, I mean, if you can pick up a dude like that, that would be another nice, like a good bench move. Does that dude come over from Korea to sign to be a bench player in MLB? I don't know. Seems unlikely, just like Rojas going to the South Side. But those are the kind of moves that, like, now all of a sudden, if you're talking about like, all right, you got this guy instead of Miles Mastroboni or Patrick Wisdom or Nick Madrigal, like that to me automatically, like, you've raised the floor significantly on what you've got from the bench. Not much pop, but then again, that's the dude who, hey, gives you some insurance against Matt Shaw, gives you some insurance against either your middle infielders getting hurt like they do 2 or 3 times a year as is. So there are little things that I think that they can be doing. Probably one more big move, big-ish, right? Like Kirby Yates, like I was saying, or Kyle Finnegan or something along those lines, like a name player for the bullpen. And then if they can get Sasaki, that would be kind of the coup de grace. But I think that's maybe a best case scenario at this point.
Yeah. And the right now the Cubs are projecting per current sportsbook win projections at 86.5 wins, projecting to win the division. And so you add somebody like a Sasaki to that, and then you're feeling pretty good about the possibility of 90 wins. And yeah, so let's hope that happens. That'd be cool. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
you would
hopefully
that.
as long as the Brewers don't go out and win 95 or something.
Okay.
Right, which is like
at
really
some point
good.
It's got to end,
right? Because we keep looking at it like, okay, the Brewers are trading everybody away. They suck. They're right. They traded Burns. Devin Williams was hurt. It's like, oh, thank God, finally this Brewers thing is done. Nope. Just gonna keep getting better. And so that's part of it. I mean, but again, to me, it's like the rest of the division. The Reds could be pretty good. The Pirates clearly have a nice young core of dudes who are coming up, and led by Paul Skeens. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to put it out there like, oh, the Cubs don't have to do much, but that's kind of the thing, and that's the issue that I've had with them in the past. But that's when you should step on the gas a little bit, understanding the financial implications, and we can almost certainly be willing to bet that they won't exceed the tax threshold again, but they don't have to. They've still got like 50 million left before they hit that. Let's say 40. They'll keep a buffer of 10. They got 40 million bucks to go out there and spend. And based on the moves I was just talking about, they could do all that and still have 25 million left over. So it's Hoyer has got the ability. It's whether things fall into that little value matrix and he can pounce on them when they come up. So again, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that, but the relief market is still wide open. So I could foresee a couple moves there yet for sure.
All right. Well, it'll be fun to watch, and that'll do it for us today. Let's circle up probably after CubsCon, and hopefully we have something to talk about, or at least we'll have, you can recap the happenings and maybe give us some insights into what happens at Lizzie McNeil's on. Is Friday night the big night there, or Saturday night? Both nights. Friday night. Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
it's never too crazy, but yeah, it should be fun.
No, it's super low key. I mean, the place gets packed up, and then it's like, but everybody. But like I said, if you want to go there, and if you got a favorite Cubs blogger guy, podcaster, some of the actual beat writers who can actually get credentialed for the Cubs and to show up to things, they're actually there as well. So usually a good crowd.
All right. Until next time, everyone. Thanks for joining us.